It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is CEO Dale Easdon. Dale is on a mission to scale clean eating without compromise. As the Chief Executive Officer of Snap Kitchen, he's responsible for taking the company's omnichannel business model to the next level. Before joining Snap, Dale spent time at Taylor Farms, where he serves as the Chief Operating Officer. He also spent over 8 years at LSG Sky Chefs. Dale graduated from Manchester University in the UK and the Royal Institute of Public Health and Hygiene. Dale Easdon, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you, Brant. That sounded so impressive, I'd even give the guy a job.
Well, it is an impressive background. And of course, our goal today is, to understand how you've gotten there. Many of our audience in the middle market, as I was chatting with you before we started, have got their eyes on that corner office, or at least to get into the C-suite. And we always like to kind of start with the early years. Tell us a little bit about growing up and, what your family life was like. Assuming that was in Scotland. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, thank you for letting me join you today. I'm truly excited to spend some time with you. Yeah, I was born on the west coast of Scotland, in the town of Paisley. Most people know Paisley because of the Paisley pattern. So when you see the silk robes that were really popular in the 80s and the silk shirts that you still see today, Paisley as a pattern is quite a popular design. And that was actually, it was a Persian design originally, but it was actually manufactured in the town of Paisley.
Interesting.
Just outside Glasgow. And I was born there. Wonderful town. So 7 of a family, my mum and dad and 5 children. I'm the second oldest. And I have an older sister, two younger brothers and a younger sister. And they're all doing extremely well. And most of them are still in Scotland. Albeit I've traveled most of my life. But I had a wonderful upbringing, great family life, strong family values. My mum and dad, in actual fact, were married at the age, my mother was 18 and my father was 19.
Wow, very young. Yeah.
And my mum at 26 had 5 children.
Oh, wow. So pretty much one a year.
Yeah. So now I have 4. I really understand just how tough and difficult that must have been for my mum. But
it's exponential, not geometrical, right?
Absolutely. But yeah, no, great upbringing, a lot of fun, and I love my family dearly.
So mom must have been pretty much a stay-at-home mom. What did your dad do?
Yeah, so my father, when I was really young, growing up until about 8, 9, or 10, my father worked. It was actually Chrysler originally, became Talbot. And it was a car plant in a town just outside of Paisley called Linwood.
Okay.
And literally, American company opened up. My father worked in the car plant. I always remember that the best Christmas parties we ever seen, because this American company really believed in the culture of investing in people. And my father, he'd probably tell you today it was one of the best jobs he ever had. Unfortunately, in the late 70s, early 80s, it was at the peak of the unions. And the Americans decided that if the union didn't ease off and allow them to improve productivity, they would pull out and leave. And they eventually closed the plant. And when they actually closed the plant, the town became a ghost town. And it's only in the past 2 or 3 years that it's starting to get revitalized as a town. So it took a long time to get over Chrysler and Talbot leaving.
And I'm sure that was a tough period for him to go through. Was he an engineer? Was he more in operations? What was his training and background?
My father was in operations, and he was basically one of the key paint in the paint shop that would be painting the cars. But my father was really a huge influence on my life. And
How so? Tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, well, if you imagine a guy bringing up his children, and then in his early 30s decided, okay, I'm going to change my whole career path. And I always remember that we had to be quiet because Dad was studying in the bedroom, because we were in a small house, and 3 bedrooms, but 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and we all shared, and 7 of us in there. So Dad would literally study in the bedroom, and he decided, in still young by today's terms, but in later years, to study to become a podiatrist.
Oh, wow.
And my
Big
father
shift.
went from being in an automotive plant to in the UK they would typically call it chiropody and a chiropodist, but it's podiatry.
Right.
And he graduated top of his class. And my father then opened up his own surgery. And he's retired now, of course, but he literally became a podiatrist.
Now, would that have been considered a medical degree? Was it more of
Yes,
a vocational?
absolutely. It's a medical degree, and he just decided that if he's going to improve the quality of life for his family, then he was going to do something different. And a huge swing, of course, and he did it. And I just always amazed by it that bringing up young children and still focusing on his studies, and and still having to work while studying. He did everything, and he did it.
So was it a sense of admiration for hard work, the ability to turn around and go in another direction? What did you admire most about Dad?
Yeah, as you get older and you realize just what's involved in the brave decision to change career path. So that obviously in later years, gives me a lot more admiration. But I think at the same time, it was just not only did he have time when he would go and study, but he'd also had time to come and take time to play with the children and had time for us.
He had that balance.
He had that balance. And of course, Mum had to keep the whole house together and try and
no small feat with 5 kids.
Yeah, and manage these crazy kids. So Mum was always she had to do the discipline side. And in those days, you got the slipper when you misbehaved, but we bought the slippers at Christmas, so they were always fluffy. So we never quite felt it. But she managed the discipline of the house, which she did a great job. And Dad went back, and he literally went back and studied and changed his career. So really impressive, and it shows you what you can do when you put your mind to something.
Who or what else were some of the early influencers in your life, Dale?
Yeah, so when I look back on it, I was close to my grandparents, both sets of grandparents, and I lost my last grandmother just, in the past 4 or 5 years that she's passed away, and she lived to a ripe old age. But on my father's side, my gran and papa, my papa died. We call him in Scotland, grandfather is papa. We call him papa, and papa died when I was 8, but my gran lived for many years on her own, but just a strong lady who was a great influence. I loved and adored her. I used to love, when I was a kid, I'd walk over on a Sunday to go and cut her grass, take care of a garden for her, and, just spend time with my grandmother. And both sets of grandparents were amazing. My grandfather on my mum's side, he was a cooper who made barrels for Chivas Regal whiskey distillery. And, so just amazing people, but just hard working class individuals that brought working class values into the family. So they were a big influence on me. And I guess my early hero would always be Muhammad Ali. I'm a boxing fan.
Is that right?
Yeah, okay. I started boxing at the age of 12, amateur boxing, and my brothers. So we all boxed all through our teen years. And I think in my last boxing, I actually stepped out of the ring when I was about 22. I went back in later years. But so I always remember in Scotland when I was a kid, and I'm not that old, but it was long before all we had Sky Television. So we had BBC One, BBC Two, and STV, which was Scottish television. And so we would be allowed to sit up in the early hours of the morning because the fights from Muhammad Ali were in the US.
Of course,
and my
yeah.
dad is a huge boxing fan. So we'd listen to live fights on the radio. And I just was always amazed by him. And then in just a few later years, up until today, one of my huge heroes is Sir Alex Ferguson of Manchester United, who right now is actually in hospital fighting to get over some brain surgery, but I'm quietly confident he's going to be okay. But a huge mentor, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later, and I'm a huge, as we call football, you would call soccer.
Yeah, soccer, right.
Huge football fan. And when I was a child in Scotland, it was Glasgow Celtic. And then in later years became Manchester United, and it still is my passion today.
Yeah, well, obviously a very successful team and one with quite a following. We haven't touched on school, so were you a good student, Dale? Tell us a little bit about those years, elementary through what we would call high school.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I would love to sit here and lie to you, but now my oldest sister, Annette, she was, as we would say, a prefect, so she patrolled the school and she was the teacher's pet, and she'd come home and tell mum and dad that I was in the headmaster's office, and so she was the blue angel, and I was the kind of the naughty kid. But I then in high school I grew up a Catholic background, and I went to an all boys Catholic school, 400 Catholic boys, and we had to wear our black blazer, shirt and tie, polished shoes, grey trousers, very strict. But I think I was the class comedian. Actually, I had a lot of fun. But if any of my,
you honed those presentation skills early on, did you?
Yeah, but if any of my teachers are listening, I truly apologize. It must have been hard. But it was interesting actually, because it's only when I first started at college that I realized the difference from adult education to teenage education. Trying to manage 400 boys, I fully understand. And if you can imagine. And our headmaster wore the black cloak. In those days, you actually got the belt, the leather strap across your hands for misbehaving. And so it was a very strict run school. And then, of course, you go on to college and then it's to call you Dale, whereas at school it was Easdon. And I used to hate that. There was just no warmth to it. And then you realize when you get into adult education, it's just a totally different field, which I went on to really, really enjoy and still enjoy today.
Now, growing up in Europe is a little different than the U.S. It's very typical for a CEO, as we've had many on the podcast, say they had a paper route, or if they were a woman CEO, folded the papers for their brothers, or perhaps sold greeting cards at Christmas. Were there any kind of entrepreneurial things that you engaged with, or was school and your boxing and perhaps soccer kind of more, how you spent your free time?
No, actually, I actually had a number of jobs growing up, and some at the same time, actually. But I've always had some, yeah. So I actually had a paper round, and it was actually such a large paper round that when I finished with it, I actually divided it into two and gave it one side to my brother and one to my sister. The younger ones, it was large enough to give them some cash. At the same time as doing newspapers, I also, in Scotland, we used to have paraffin heaters, which to keep the houses warm, because, most of our working class homes didn't have central heating at that time. And we had paraffin heaters that kept the house warm, and I would go around and sell paraffin. And I was just a kid that sat in the back of the van and ran up the stairs and delivered. And then in the winter months, my entrepreneurial skills were great because when the snow would come, I would get all the kids in the street with me and we'd knock on the doors and shovel all the snow off the paths and then go home that night and pray that it would snow again so that I could repeat the whole process again the next day. So, and then of course in Scotland in the winters are pretty harsh, and then in summer it's still light at 11 o'clock at night. So, you can really get out and play as a kid, and then so from an entrepreneurial side, that was the jobs that I had, and it was just a way of earning that extra cash that you needed as you were growing up as a teenager.
And let's talk about that cash. What did you spend that money on? Were you a saver, or did it go to the equivalent of, what baseball cards would have been for kids growing up here,
Yeah,
admiring pieces of
yeah,
your soccer fans, or
yeah.
how did you, or what did you do with those funds?
Yeah, no, I'm a big saver today, but I wasn't that smart then. But I've always had a love of music, and so I still today I love live music. I love all types of music. But when I was growing up, teenager, I was at that stage I was kind of into punk rock, and then went from there into kind of new wave came out, which was David Bowie and all Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, all those guys. So I used to head up to Glasgow on the train and go to there was a store called Listens and just sit there all day listening to music and buy records.
Yep.
Uh, you know,
LPs back then, I
Back
presume.
then it was LPs and singles and bring them all home and just listen to music. And my friends were all into the same thing, so it would just be always spending my money in the record shops and the usual junk that you would spend it on. So not a big saver in those days.
Did you play a musical instrument as well? Did you aspire to that at all?
So interestingly, I actually have a couple of guitars at home. I cannot read music, but I can sit and strum and listen to it and pick it up. I have my son today is actually a music teacher. So my 25-year-old son, he's graduated and he's just finished his first year as a middle school vocal and choir director. So he is extremely talented, and so I see that talent in him, and he's way more talented than I've ever been. But and he's also a great vocalist. So, but music's always been a big part of my life. I find it extremely relaxing, and I love to listen to music.
An escape.
Absolutely.
So you decided to go to college, and it sounds like Dad, other than his studies afterwards, did not go to university. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you were the first, or did
Yeah,
big
I was.
sister Annette also
No, no.
head off to university?
Yeah, no. I was the first, and I actually I picked Manchester because I had my mum's sister, my aunt. She actually moved to Manchester, so I had family in Manchester, and I also had a love of Manchester, just the city, the Manchester United, the city, Manchester Business School, Manchester University, great schools, and at that time, I had actually gone down to work in flight for then it was THF Trust House 40, which today is now Alpha LSG. And they had an intern program that when I joined them, I actually got onto their intern program. So I started in college first in Greenock in the west coast of Scotland, where I went to culinary school to do what's known as 7061 basic cookery based on Escoffier's French cuisine. And my brother, who is 14 months younger than me, he went first and he went into culinary school, and I decided to follow. Quickly realized that it's really hard work in the restaurant business, and you have to be there till the last customer leaves. And but I've stayed in the food business all of my career, so that start was a good start for me. And
Was
then
going to college a big decision? Something that your parents had encouraged you to do? Was that kind of looked upon as
yeah,
this is
yeah,
what Dale will do? Or
yeah. Well, they always give a lot of support and guidance, and one of the things that I always remember a friend telling me in those early stages was that if you become a chef, you will never be unemployed.
people
uh,
always have to eat.
People have to eat, so that was kind of a big motivator. Uh, and to be truthful, I've never been unemployed. So those
Prove
early,
that one out.
yeah, proof that one out. But then I went back to do my business degree, and did NEBS, which is National Education Board for Senior Management. And then so that was at Manchester University. But then at the same time, in the food business, food safety compliance was changing pretty dramatically. They were bringing in what's known as HACCP, which is Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points, and it really changed the food safety code. So I decided I would go and study just an intermediate class at the Royal Institute, and went along and really enjoyed the topic, and decided I would go further. And I then went and did the diploma. Then I went further and did advance into HACCP and food safety. So I got that side as well, which was really useful as well in later years under food safety design. I started designing in-flight facilities that I could design to code as I went forward with it. And then at the same time, our company under THF, Trust House 40 was basically had the largest revenue stream was the hotel stream. And they had the hotel. So, for example, at the George Sang, the five-star hotel off the Champs-Élysées in Paris was the 40 Hotel. And THF then became 40. And they sold off the in-flight division, which I was with. And they sold off a division they called Gardner Merchant, which did industrial cafeterias and restaurants. And when the in-flight side sold off, we basically became Alpha PLC, and we didn't have the funding behind us that we had from the large, family company. So we then had to start to be extremely lean, and the company at that time brought in Alexander Proudfoot Consultants to help us to start a lean journey of lean manufacturing. And I just had such an interest in it. They recognized quickly that I had skills in managing change. People respected me. And I got onto a journey that, I've dearly loved all of my career, which was operational excellence and lean manufacturing. And I know we'll talk later about Porsche, the sports cars, and all the stuff there.
Well, let's back up a little bit. What was that first job out of college? Was it with THF?
It was with THF. And
so you did an internship with them, it sounds like.
Yes, and their program.
And then they offered you something full time.
Yeah, the program was a three-year program, and it's just such a shame that organizations can't do it today, because in the in-flight side, their program, there was actually 6 originals, and we're all still pretty good friends all these years later. And you had to spend 3 months in every department. So finance, you were in finance, but when you went into the airline wash, so when you imagine being on your aircraft and they bring the carrier down the middle with the meals or the drinks, all of that has to be washed and rotated. And when you worked in the wash department, you literally rolled your sleeves up and you worked in the wash. And their view was, if you're going to learn how to do this and manage people, you need to understand every functional area.
So true.
And it was an amazing program. So at the same time you were going to school, plus you were learning, live the aspects of business. And they had high expectations of that team. And all of us went on to be, extremely successful because of that program. I always take it back there where I went from there, that I got my first little unit where I was at the age of 24, I was running a cook freeze plant for the company. And, so my career went on from there, and it was basically based on that intern program.
What were some of those early leadership lessons you learned from bosses and mentors you had during those early years?
Yeah, well, when I actually started into that role, we were still in the in-flight days, the earlier days, we were still a pretty strong unionized environment. And then in those days, it was the Transport and General Workers Union. So all communication had to be extremely clear. And if I sat an employee down to promote them or to reprimand them or any communication whatsoever, you had to give them the right to have a shop steward with you. So you can imagine, you really had to be grounded in how you followed the procedures.
Sure. Yeah. What you said and how you said it.
And to be truthful with you, it's one of the areas where I much prefer guidelines to procedures. I think guidelines allow for common sense, and procedures, sometimes you have to make decisions that are not always the right ones. But it allowed me to really learn to hone in good communication skills. And I think the second one is, in the in-flight industry, the employees that are manufacturing the meals, who are just the salt of the earth, are wonderful people, but they're working in a chilled environment, and they're probably getting, $1 above the minimum wage. And you have to be able to motivate them. You have to be able to just appreciate them, take good care of them, because they could go to McDonald's for another $1 an hour. And so it taught you those principles of respecting the team from below. And it's something that I've prided myself today that I've never lost, where I want to know the name of my employees. I want to be in the departments. And I learned that very early on in my career.
Dale, tell us about the first time you started managing people. What was that like? Was it probably older people than you, I can imagine? Some of the union environment or outside of it?
Yeah, in the airline industry, which I went on, as I spent a long time in the airline industry, which I dearly loved. But the early meetings I would go to, there were leaders there who had been in the industry for 25 and 30 years. And I used to sit there and think, how could anybody do this for 30 years? And then I found that after 27 years, I was that guy. So
you were that guy.
So
right.
I could understand it gets into your bloodstream, and but they were definitely older guys. But I remember, and it's not to sit here and blow my trumpet, but I do remember that I had a boss at one time who said in a meeting in front of all of his team, and I was part of the team. He said, Dale, if we were in the First World War in the trenches, and I said as the leader, we're going over, I wouldn't have to look if you were there. He says
Wow. What a compliment.
He said others would say, and this was in front of the team. He said others would say, but they're firing missiles, or there's grenades, or there's bullets. He said you would go, and it was true. So because what I actually did is every opportunity the company had, whether it would be open another airport, I helped open Charles de Gaulle. I would raise my hand and I'd pack my suitcase and I would go.
That's very interesting, Dale. We've heard this a couple of times from CEOs. There's so many jobs that people don't want to do, but you advance by saying, I'll give it a try. Let me step in. Let me go help. Let me go do that. And that's so well respected by those in more senior positions.
Yeah, and I always took the opportunities. So then I became one of the youngest general managers. Then I became one of the youngest directors. I took on a project called Innovate to put lean into all 27 Alpha facilities. And I always signed up for opportunities all through my career, and I've got to travel the world, and I've been blessed with that. But it was just a very early learning that said if you're really going to go on here, you just have to pack the suitcase and go where the company needs you.
Let's expand on that a little bit. Share with us some of the best or perhaps worst lessons you've learned from previous bosses that still stick with you today.
Yeah, as they say, to protect the innocent.
You don't have to mention names.
No, absolutely, absolutely. But I remember growing up in the earlier stages of my in-flight management career, and one of the boss that I had at the time, the particular boss at the time, was completely paranoid that he was going to be dismissed, and he actually fulfilled his own prophecy by it, because he just used to get myself. There were three of us who ran three separate units, and we were all young. We were really learning. But he would share such emotions about, there's just had a meeting and I've not been invited. I know I'm on the agenda. And he would share this fear that we used to dread having the meetings. And he just didn't realize that sometimes as a senior leader, you have to protect and keep that away from the team below you. And he just was so transparent, and eventually they changed him. Ironically, I went on to take on a bigger role, and eventually I had a higher role than he had at that time. But it taught me that showing those panic emotions when all around you are panicked is just the wrong thing. It serves no value whatsoever. So I learned from him, ironically, that under pressure, when others expect you to do something, do the opposite, and just remain calm. And that was a tough 2 or 3 years. But eventually he was replaced by someone who's still a dear friend and mentor to me today, which was the best thing that ever happened to me. A chap called Don McRitchie, who is now retired, but just such a dear friend, and he was just a fantastic leader that just showed you how it should be done.
How would you say your leadership style evolved over time, on your journey to the corner office, Dale?
Yeah, I think in the earlier stages, growing up in a manufacturing background, I always had the subject matter expertise. So I knew the business, I knew that side of it. I believe I've always had good people skills because I just enjoy working with people. That side was always strong. I think the key, one of the bigger learnings as time has gone on, and especially in the world I'm in today, which, private equity and startup, is the value of the pound or the value of the dollar, which basically making sure that you fully understand the ROI in all investments. And in the earlier stages, I would sometimes get the task done before I'd really look at, the true ROI of that task. So really learning the analytics and learning the financial way around the P&L and really understanding the cash flow side of the business is something I learned in later years, certainly the last 15, 20 years in good detail. But in the earlier stages, it was more the task that I enjoyed, the project, getting the project and get it done. And I was very successful, but today I tend to really focus on surrounding myself with great subject matter experts and really honing in on those ROI mindsets and those type of projects.
Let's shift a little bit and talk about company culture. Now, you obviously were THF, which became LSG Sky Chefs, as I understand the evolution with that. Large company, corporate culture, pretty well established, obviously still around today in different iterations. And now you're, working with a middle market, private equity-backed company. What are your thoughts on building a company culture, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I always knew that I had strong values in the cultural side of the business. When I ran Manchester Airport, eventually when I became the GM, I was actually the first leader to be awarded Investors in People, which is, I guess, the equivalent of J.D. Powers in the US. And I was the first company in Manchester Airport, and I was the first company within the THF group. And then it became Alpha. The company progressed to become 40. Then it became Alpha In-Flight Services. And I was the first, and I was driving it with my team, but really understanding not only the culture was important, but how do you develop future leadership? And how do you take that so that employees feel that they're connected to the values and the strategy of your company? And it was something I learned very early on at Manchester Airport that I've stayed, and it's remained with me constantly, and it's still with me today. And interestingly, as I recruit senior leaders today, when I was growing up in the business world in the earlier stages, most individuals were with a company for 10 or 15 years, and it was seen as a long-term commitment. And I find when I look at resumes today that I'm seeing individuals in their late 20s, early 30s with a resume that has 2 and 3 years
yeah,
as a long time within the company. And at first, I actually read that as a lack of commitment. And what I've truly learned is, in actual fact, it's not. If you're getting 3 or 4 years out of a leader, then you have to be at the top of your game. You have to be keeping them fulfilled. They have to have a mission and believe in your values of your company. And so the competencies don't change from the earlier stages of the learnings to today. What changes is you just have to be at the top of your game and continually make them feel part of the vision and strategy of the company. And then if you keep them for 3 or 4 years, you've actually done extremely well.
Yeah, the ROI on that's huge.
It's huge. It's huge. So I think the days of 10 to 15 years in organizations have gone. And but the cultural side of taking care of people, making them feel involved in the strategy and the vision, and being connected with them. And I've always had an open door policy, always. And I still have today. No matter what I'm working on, if someone knocks on the door, I'll stop what I'm doing and I'll sit down and I'll have a chat and just mentor them in any opportunity I get.
What's unusual or perhaps unique about your culture at Snap Kitchen?
Yeah, well, so Snap was my first experience in startup. So I've always been a large corporate guy, and I came in.
Big transition.
Yeah, so of course, I turned up for my interview in my suit and my shirt and tie, and I
could have coached you on that.
Yeah, but I'm still very British in some ways. I try to. Hopefully, one day all these shirts that I have are going to come back in style. I know they are. So
and the ties as well.
And the ties as well. And I could see them all look at me as if I was some sort of fool. But I was lucky enough. I was approached by the El Caterton Investment Group, who are one of Snap's investors, and Dave Kirchhoff at the time was the CEO, who just a great friend of mine, and Dave came from Weight Watchers, and he's now at iFly, and I replaced him as the CEO. And Dave interviewed me.
Was he one of the founders?
He wasn't the original founder. No, that was Brad Radolph and Martin Berson, two great guys. They came up with this wonderful creative idea. But Dave came in to really put in some structure and start to shape the company, and he recruited me. So I was his COO, and Dave is, 6'1", 6'2", absolute incredible physique. This guy was in a snap t-shirt and jeans, and I thought, okay, I'm going to have to get to the gym. So, but
and lose the suit.
So I'm sat here today with my jeans on and my shoes and my shirt untucked and all that trendy stuff. And so I learned though that the cultural side is incredible because we have 650 employees. We have front of house, which are the retail stores. We have middle of house, which is distribution logistics, and then back of house, food manufacturing. And then there's 60 team members here in Austin at headquarters. And probably the average age of the office is about 25, maybe 26. It's just a young team and some great, great brains in this young team, which is amazing dynamics. But in this office, you can bring the dog to work. We have a basketball hoop next door in the warehouse. We have table tennis. I do a town hall meeting every 2 weeks where I'm fully transparent on the business and how we're performing. I record.
Are you an open book business in the sense that you share financials?
Absolutely. And I always have been. And a lot of people are nervous about that. But I learned early on that, you don't lose business on what your competitor's doing. You lose business in what you're doing. And, I'm not sharing things that someone else could get their hands on. But at the same time, in startup, the team have to understand how we're performing. And I like to keep them updated. And every month since I've been over and taken over the helm, we've just got significantly better over the past 6 months. And it's just an amazing story and still to be told. We've got a lot to do, but I like to be clear and transparent. And then once a month, I have a young superstar in my team who literally is into filmmaking, and he has about $300,000 worth of the most amazing equipment. So he actually records a message every month, and I invite a team member from the business to sit beside me, and then I will give a business overview. The employees can give and ask questions, and I answer the questions, and then I'll introduce my team member who's with me, and they'll do a little bit about what they do in the company, and that goes out every month.
That goes out to all your stores.
All of the 600 employees, and then they know what's going on in the business. So I like that side of it. We have a lot of bean bags and all the comfy stuff you do in startup and
21st century company.
Yeah, it's a 21st century company. We don't measure the clock. Come and go as you please. Our team, we just have a lot of fun. It's always Dale. Mr. Easdon's my father. I don't have that formal. Nobody needs to tell me I'm the boss. I realize that, and I like to treat the team with dignity and respect.
We've got a few minutes left, but I want to talk a little bit about hiring. Dale, what do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in?
Yeah, I'm always looking for leaders that have taken risks in their career. I like to see individuals that have taken some real brave decisions, and taken on challenges. It's such a fundamental. As you well know, in today's leadership world, where you've got to have that bravery to take on challenges, and so that's kind of number one. I try to see that through the resume. Subject matter expertise is obviously critical. I like to recruit individuals that know what they're doing, and then give them a vision and allow them to do their job without micromanaging. So those type of skill sets I'm generally looking for. Especially in the resume as they go forward. And then I'm really looking for a high level of confidence in those individuals that come in to sit with me, that they are, they're prepared to take on the challenge.
Do you recruit against that proactive skill that we talked about? The stand up and take the risk and I'll do that job. Is that part of what you try to cover, or what kind of box does that fall into?
Yeah, I do. It's interesting. By the time that an individual reaches me, they've been interviewed by the senior team, right, and I generally see the last two, maybe three individuals that sit with me. And I always do the same exercise, and it's probably not going to have any value now if people listen to it, it's gone. But when they listen to our podcast, but it's really helpful, and it's a creative little tool that I've designed myself. But I will sit with the individual in my office, and I will literally use the board, the flip chart, and I draw a circle on the board. and I say, let's put the job that you're applying for in the middle. So keep it simple, director procurement. And I'll write that in the middle, and I'll say, what I want is there's no right or wrong answer, and it's not a trick, but help me list the competencies needed for this job. So I said, let me give you one first. So managing change. So I'll list that up, and I'll say, take me through what you think. And I try to get about 10 different competencies. Now, it's interesting, a number of individuals struggle between the skill sets and an understanding of competency. So that's where I start. So imagine the arms coming out of a wheel, and they've listed 10, and I write them all on the board, and then I take a different colored pen, and I say, okay, help me number them 1 through 10, 1 being what you believe is the most important skill for the job, and right through to number 10, assuming they're all important, but let's do number 1. So then we'll do another round, 1 through 10, and then I take another colored pen, and I say 1 more round, this time, what is your number 1 skill to number 10, assuming you have skills of them all, but let's number them 1 more time. And what you sometimes find is what they believe is a skill for the job, and the skills they actually believe is their 1 through 5 or 1 through 10, they actually, there's a difference. And that's what I use as the discussion point. And I then drill into that on what are those skills and why do you see the difference and how can we develop you? That's the typical, I take about 30 minutes to go through that. And I do it on a flip chart. I take a picture of my phone, I roll it up and tell them to take it home. And I know that if they did it in a different environment under that less pressure, they may do it differently. But I just want to see on the wall or on the flip chart the skills they believe are needed and the skills they believe they have. And I tend to go through that process.
You know what I like most about that is it's really also a self-sorting attempt at determining whether or not that person's right for the job. Because through that exercise, they're really going to be able to see, wow, maybe my skill set doesn't match up very well with this job, or wow, this is the perfect job for me because it really does align. Do you see that happening sometimes in those conversations?
It's exactly what happens. And it's a very useful tool also internally, because a number of times when a job is posted, individuals believe, I've been here 5 years, therefore that must be my job. And then they can quickly see that the skills needed, they don't actually qualify. So it's just a useful little tool that I use often.
Dale, it's terrific. Well, listen, we are just out of time. I want to thank you for the generosity you've had with us. But we do have one last question. We ask this of all our CEOs. What career and life advice would you give to someone who's got their eyes on the corner office, or maybe he wants to be an entrepreneur at some point in their career, making that transition from the large corporate as you did to the middle market? And we're talking to people that are, as I mentioned earlier on, before we started the podcast, people that are in middle management, but they're, at the top of their game. They see themselves as an A player. Perhaps they're also are already in the C-suite and, want to make their way to the corner office. What kind of, direction would you say is important for them at that stage in their careers?
Sure. That's a great question. So I would probably say there's a number of steps. So number 1 for me would be take on multiple challenges. And I mean large challenges. If you feel a little scared or nervous that this is out your wheelhouse, you've picked the right challenge. Take it on. That's number one.
Right. Outside of the comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely. Number 1. Number 2 would be literally remember we don't make profits at headquarters. We make profits in the manufacturing or in your business. Spend at least 60% of your time in the business, driving the business from the bottom up, spending time with your people and get to know them. The third one for me is never get so high up the ladder that you forget the guys that actually make you successful. Make sure you spend as much time. I get as upset with my employees in the kitchen, the managers, if there's no fresh flowers in the cafeteria, as I do if they have a miss in their P&L. And I truly believe that. They would tell you if you called them, fresh flowers, take care of the people. It's very important. 4 would be continue to learn. Read, go back to do some classes. Don't believe that because you're graduated, you're there. Continue to learn. And then I think number 5 would always be do everything in your power to make the place that you work a fun place to work. Be part of the team, create a team culture. And then when these jobs open up in the corner office, people actually believe you're ready. And you'll find that companies can pick you quite easily if you tend to follow those 4 or 5 rules that I've said. Then I think when you get that role, people are automatically going to follow you. and I think it's the best job I've ever had. I love it. I enjoy it every day, and being part of a great team, and I'm proud to be part of the team. It's just been, it's been a rewarding journey, and I enjoy every day that I get a chance to do it.
Dale Easdon, thank you once again for sharing your journey into the corner office.
It's been my pleasure. Brant, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Handley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.